Well, good morning. My name is State Representative Ryan Spain. I represent the 73rd District in the Illinois House. I live in Peoria, and I'm honored to be here today with Governor Pat Quinn. We're here for an on-time start with handouts even for all of you. So appreciate the governor's leadership and partnership on an important initiative that we're here to talk about, which is House Joint Resolution Constitutional Amendment 19. And so this is a proposal that we'll spend a little time talking about more today, but at its core, it's a way to empower our citizens, our voters, to deliver upon the ethical reforms and standards of conduct in office that we need more of in the state of Illinois. So we're here, it's been about 2 years, almost exactly. It was March 2nd, 2022, where former Speaker Madigan was indicted on federal charges of bribery and racketeering. And since that time, we've seen what has happened. We're still awaiting progress in the Madigan trial, but the ComEd 4 have been convicted and found guilty. Tim Mapes, the Speaker's former Chief of Staff, has been convicted and found guilty. And we know that the rash of ethical lapses in the state of Illinois continues to be a very huge problem for us. And yet there's been a frustration. I've certainly felt it. The lack of urgency for the 177 lawmakers that are part of the Illinois General Assembly to deliver on ethics reforms that are needed in the state of Illinois. So there's a different way that we can do this. And we're here in the month of March, which is Ethics Awareness Month. And we think that there's nothing more important that we could do or be appropriate to deliver on this first day of the session in March to talk about a way that we can empower voters to make and enforce better ethical standards by using a citizen petition effort so that we can finally move forward and make some of the changes that are needed here. So with that, to talk a little bit more and some of the deadlines and tactics, that's another reason we're putting this forward today, fully 60 days in advance of the deadline for moving constitutional amendments to the ballot through the legislature. I'll turn it over to Governor Quinn for more discussion about HJR Constitutional Amendment number 19. Governor?
Okay, well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank Ryan for being the sponsor of this measure. I think it's very, very important that this year, 2024, that the people of Illinois have their General Assembly consider an ethics initiative. We need this in our state. And many years ago, I was 27 years old. I'm not that anymore. But we filed a petition in Springfield with 635,158 signatures, the all-time record. It was called the Political Honesty Initiative. It had 3 constitutional amendments dealing with the actions of the General Assembly and ethics in general. One dealt with the practice of legislators collecting their entire pay. They had been doing this for over 100 years, collecting their entire pay in the first day of office before they did a single day's work. The Second Amendment dealt with double dipping, where legislators would be on more than one public payroll. And the Third Amendment dealt with conflict of interest voting, that legislators should be required to disclose any personal or family or financial interests they had in the bill and then abstain from voting. 3 constitutional amendments. We filed that upstairs on the first floor of this Capitol. We had to file it in one book. The State Board of Elections said, under the law, all those pages, 27,600 pages, had to be tied together in one book. Otherwise, it wouldn't count. And you just imagine page numbering, 27,600. Well, we did it, and we had to build a canoe. The canoe was about 20 feet long, maybe a little longer, and we put all those pages in the canoe, but we had to tie it together. And a fellow called us up, and he said the way to do this is to drill holes in the petition and then tie it together with airplane cable because it won't break and it'll hold them all together. So we complied with the law. The people of Illinois did in a bicentennial year, 1976, and filed those petitions. The case later went to the Illinois Supreme Court. It was a case of first impression. The court said, you can't do this by initiative. You can't have ethics amendments to the Constitution by citizen initiative and referendum. One judge did dissent from that and said you could do that, at least for the conflict of interest voting, which has never been addressed since then by the General Assembly. Legislative Inspector General Tom Homer, who served for about 10 years, I believe, in leaving the office, wrote a letter to the General Assembly saying this is a very serious issue that has never been addressed. You need to have a standard of conduct that prohibits conflict of interest voting. Well, that hasn't happened. The reason it hasn't happened, I think, is that we don't have an ethics initiative as sponsored by Representative Ryan Spain today, and hopefully many more of our legislators, Democrat and Republican, will sign on to this measure. But somebody has to put it into the hopper, and that's what's happening today. As Ryan pointed out, the deadline for putting a constitutional amendment on the ballot in Illinois for November 5th's election is May 5th of this year, 6 months before the general election. So we've got our work to do. We have 2 months to do it. We certainly hope to have legislative hearings on the ethics initiative. It will really deal with what the court said in 1976, that people don't have the express right to initiate reform amendments, ethical amendments to the legislative article and to the Constitution of Illinois. So we want to address that and change that and give people that opportunity. This is not unheard of. In the Midwest, states like Missouri and Michigan and Ohio have had ethics initiative opportunities since 1912. Matter of fact, in 2018, Missouri passed Amendment 1 for a Clean Missouri, a comprehensive ethics initiative that the people put on the ballot by their signatures. And as we see around our country right now, the initiative process has been used by all sorts of people in different states to address important issues, whether it's health care, whether it's ethics, whether it's raising the minimum wage. The people understand that the power of initiative is the fourth branch of government. We have the judicial branch, we have the legislative branch. I know something about the executive branch. I was governor for 6 years, and over again, I asked the aforementioned Mike Madigan to consider an ethics initiative, and he said no. He said he didn't believe in that. Well, he's not here anymore. He's on trial. His trial begins 4 weeks before the November 5th election. I think it's very, very important that now that the former speaker is not here with us anymore, there be a new day. Let's let some fresh air into the opportunity to have a real debate in Illinois about an initiative process, at least for ethics. Because since 2018, when people in Missouri, our neighboring state, voted on ethics for their legislature and their government, we've had 10 Illinois legislators, former or current, indicted and or convicted for felonies for public corruption. Isn't that an alarm bell to all of us that we got to roll up our sleeves and do more to clean things up, clean up the corruption? That's really what the jury said when Ryan mentioned the ComEd 4 who were convicted about a year or so ago. The jurors came out, some of them did, and pleaded with the legislature to do something about the need for tougher, no-nonsense ethics laws in Illinois. Well, the real way to do it is with the people who, with 635,158 signatures almost 50 years ago, said we need reform. Now, a lot of those folks, I was driving down here today through the towns and so on, some of those folks have passed on. But I can remember how dedicated they were. They were not big shots. They were not political people. They were not professional politicians. They were everyday people who were the heart and soul of our state. And they went out and got signatures. We didn't have a huge budget. We did this on $15,000. And we had to build that canoe with volunteer help. And to me, that's really what government's got to be. People banding together from all parties, Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever your party, banding together and using your signature, your autograph on a piece of paper to change things for the better. I think it's real important. I want to finish in just 1 second here, that the people of Illinois understand that we, the people, can make a difference. And the way you do it is with the initiative process. So way back when, 1976, this was the petition. This was the voter petition for the political honesty initiative and amendments. It was pretty long, obviously, 8.5 by, I think, 22. And people signed their names. They autographed this. They gave their signature. And it seems to me that that process, where people can be enthusiastic about the government that they run. The people run the government. It's not the government running the people. And that's what the ethics initiative that's sponsored by Representative Ryan Spain and hopefully many more will show, I think, that the opportunity that people together can make a difference at the ballot box. And just to complete the way this will work, this is the actual constitutional amendment. It has to be submitted. Obviously, it has to be voted on by May 5th. 3/5 of both houses, Democrat, Republican, both houses of the House and Senate have to approve by a 60% or more majority. Hopefully, we can get more than that. And then it goes on the November ballot, November 5th. So when we're voting for president, the biggest turnout we're going to have in every 4 years, this is an opportunity for the people of Illinois to take charge, and especially after this terrible scandal involving Commonwealth Edison. They pled guilty to bribing the legislature for almost a decade. I was the governor of Illinois when that bribery scandal began. Nobody knew about it. I vetoed their bill, that ComEd bill, in 2011. And it was overridden by the legislature. Later, almost a decade later, we find out there was bribery going on, corruption going on, that allowed Commonwealth Edison, by their own admission, to pass a law that gave them almost $4 billion more in profits at the expense of the people of Illinois. If that alone doesn't encourage people to say, we need an ethics initiative, it seems to me that's a pretty important way to send that message. The trial that'll occur in October of this year, there'll be more information coming out. I would hope that when people are witnessing that trial, they also will have a chance within a few weeks of the beginning of the trial to vote for something really significant that will empower the voters, to strengthen the voters of Illinois to clean things up. So, Brian and I would be glad to answer any questions if you have them.
So Republican, Democrat here, but where are any Democrats from the other chambers or within the House to stand here alongside you guys?
Yeah. The longest journey begins with the first step. And I began climbing the steps of the Capitol here today. I've done that before when we did the Political Honesty Initiative and also with the Cutback Amendment, which succeeded. And when I was governor, we got the Recall Amendment passed. I've been involved in getting constitutional amendments passed, and I think we can do that here. Now, I'm going to see the Speaker of the House this afternoon, I believe it's at 2:30, and I encourage him, I'll implore him to give us hearings, encourage members of his caucus to support this constitutional amendment. It's not a partisan measure. It's really a measure for the people. But it has to start somewhere. And I want to thank Ryan Spain for doing this, because when I did the Cutback Amendment in 1980, there were senators and representatives from Peoria that stood up, and they were one of the first to support what we were doing. So there is, I guess, some legacy or memory of folks from the central part of our state, Peoria, who are willing to, get the ball rolling. And that's what we have to do. We have to build a majority. I'm not naive about this. To get 3/5 of both houses is very difficult. But you got to have somebody who's raised their hand and said, take me. I'm volunteering. And that's what Ryan Spain's doing. There's a passage in the Old Testament from Isaiah, a prophet, who talks about volunteerism. He said, "Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? I will go where you lead me." So we're ready to go forward in Illinois. If we're going to change our state and toughen up the ethics standards for elected officials, it's got to start right here. And I understand, I'm a Democrat, he's a Republican. We're going to build a majority. We're going to build a majority of people who understand that we aren't going to have the kind of government that the taxpayers and voters of Illinois deserve unless we have an ethics initiative. If Missouri can have it, if Ohio can have it, if Michigan have it, why can't we have it? We've waited long enough.
Well, the idea of initiative and referenda has been around since the days of William Jennings Bryan, and they've always been promoted with the same arguments. But what do you say to the argument that in a legislative process, these things are subject to committee hearings, and committee hearings have media oversight and public oversight? When you go to an initiative and referenda process, it's the battle of the well-heeled special interest groups, and these things are fought out with deceptive TV ads and sound bites. And there's actually more public protection built into the legislative process than into this initiative and referenda process.
Well, that's not really true. I mean, a lot of the referendums that raised the minimum wage around the country were done by volunteer groups that took on powerful interests and won. That was also true with health care. If you look at the history of Illinois, there were 3 governors who were for the initiative process. John Peter Altgeld, Edward Dunn, and Pat Quinn. 3 governors, 3 Democratic governors believe in this process, particularly when it comes to ethics in government. For the legislature to have the sole power to regulate itself is not healthy. That's why you need a 4th branch of government. That's what the initiative process is. Contrary to what you just said, when you have an initiative and it's on the ballot, it allows lots of eyes to see for an extended period of time. There's robust debate. I was involved in one with the cutback amendment in 1980. There were debates all over the state about whether or not the House of Representatives should be reduced in number and size, and the members elected in a different way. So in a lot of ways, the most public way to debate an issue and hear about its pluses and minuses is through the initiative process. And around the country recently, in places like Nevada or Arizona or Ohio or Michigan, or maybe it looks like Montana and maybe also Florida, are going to have major initiatives this year. And so I would say all of us in Illinois, we shouldn't just sit on the sidelines and say, why can't we also participate in the initiative process, at least for stronger ethics standards in our government? We should set those standards, the people, and if you do it in the proper way, it'll get plenty of analysis in the campaign, and the people can vote, yea or nay. Go ahead, Ryan.
And I think, Peter, it's clearly not working, right? You know, we have a process right now where the legislature can impose its own ethical improvements, and it's not happening. In fact, the only time that we've seen sort of the legislature checking the box on ethics reform, our legislative inspector general resigned in disgust and said we're actually weakening her office. We created a revolving door ban on lobbying that sitting members use to just turn around and make themselves lobbyists right out of the gate. So it hasn't been working, and we've made it far too difficult for citizens to have input and control about the composition and expectations of their government. We need to change that.
Representative, you're in the Ethics and Elections Committee. We've had 2 years after Madigan was, charged and all these convictions and whatnot. Where's the discussion about ethics reforms been in the committee?
Yeah, it's been very disappointing to me and frustrating. I have a lot of respect for the chairman of that committee, but I've actually volunteered to leave that committee to take on a different assignment just because there hasn't been a lot happening in that committee. I was so excited that we had created in the House, in the aftermath of Speaker Madigan, an Ethics and Elections Committee. Boy, it should have been the busiest committee in all of state government, and it just hasn't been so far.
At the same time with that committee, obviously there's been a lot of focus on election bills, but with this proposal coming forward, don't you think there should be strong bipartisan push for this to be heard, at least during a hearing, let alone a vote on the floor?
Well, speaking for myself as a voter and citizen of Illinois and former governor for 6 years, I think this is the minimum that should happen. There should be a robust hearing to let the people of Illinois have their say on the initiative process. You know, if you look at history, in 1902, the people of Illinois did vote on whether we should have an initiative in our state. Overwhelmingly, 83% said yes. Unfortunately, the legislature did not do anything. So 8 years later, in 1910, they had another statewide advisory referendum. Should we have the initiative process? It was happening all over our country in Midwest states and Western states. People again voted overwhelmingly for initiative. And then there was a governor who ran for office in 1912. When I was lieutenant governor, his portrait was right outside my office. His name was Edward Dunn. That's his number one issue in 1912 when he campaigned for governor. Get the initiative process for the people of our state, like other folks around the country. And what happened in 1913, this is the facts. The proposal that Dunn had for initiative went to the Senate and passed 44-4. It then went to the House. There were 150 members of the House at that time. He needed 2/3 to put it on the ballot for the people to approve. Well, they had 100 votes. Just as the Speaker of the House was bringing down the gavel, some guy, machine guy from Cook County, Chicago, Democrat, raised his hand and said, "I'm changing my vote from yes to no." That's why Illinois doesn't have initiative. We were one vote short in 1913. So here we are 111 years later. It's not too late, Ryan. We're going to get it done this year, at least for ethics. And I think it's important for people to know history, to know what happened before. People like Altgeld and Dunn were reformers. They happen to be Democrats, but whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or not at all, you're an independent, we're all in this together. And now's the time to act.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead next.
Obviously, when you came into office back in 2009, it was in the wake of one of the biggest corruption scandals the state's seen. If you couldn't successfully get it done then, what makes you think you'll have better success now?
Well, I want to, for the record, my first day, full day as governor, we appointed a reform commission, I did. And I named the members, and they had hearings all over the state. They issued recommendations, and we passed quite a few of them into law. Limits on campaign contributions, stronger Freedom of Information Act rules, lots to do with the purchasing of state government and so on. But I couldn't get initiative. I could get recall. We got a recall amendment on the ballot in 2010, a constitutional amendment dealing with the office of governor. When I was governor, at one time, both my predecessors, George Ryan and Rod Blagojevich, were in jail at the same time when I was governor. You know, so the people knew that we needed to do something in that area. Now, what happened? Anybody who knows about Mike Madigan knows that he wasn't for certain reforms. He was not for direct democracy. And he was Speaker of the House, and he controlled the House, the flow of bills. I actually, on several occasions, through a mandatory veto, put in things like at least having an advisory referendum on the initiative process, the ethics initiative. And he wouldn't call that. So he's gone. He's not here anymore. So it seems to me there's an opening for all of us in Illinois to have a real debate on ethics initiative.
Say you get your ethics reforms passed, and what would be the execution? Because you've got break a law, change a law, and now you have state legislators who will amend laws after they break the law. So what are the consequences if you get this passed?
Well, once you empower the voters of Illinois to enact ethics standards, whether it deals with campaign finance or ethics in general, conflict of interest voting would be an example, stronger standards with respect to pension payments for former legislators who were convicted of felonies. Those are issues I think that would be part of a movement of voters to reform things. There's, I'm sure, a variety of issues that have come up, and was mentioned just a moment ago by Ryan, revolving door. We need tougher standards there. But the people would have that chance to enact them.
And
You had a
kinda-
question, yeah.
You kind of just answered my question in part. It's if you, how do you envision this working if the legislature approves this? What are some examples of things that I, as a citizen, should bring to voters through initiative petition?
Well, I mentioned conflict of interest voting, I think is something that the people petitioned for in 1976 to have a strong standard against conflict of interest voting. I think that's been outlined by Tom Homer, the longtime legislative inspector general. I think the issue of futilities, because of Commonwealth Edison and their behavior, there's a bill before the legislature now dealing with whether or not they should be allowed to write off charitable contributions, political contributions, things that they've been able to get away with over the years. I think stronger income tax disclosure. I issued an executive order when I was governor dealing with that on the part of state constitutional officers and legislative leaders. I think those are some of the subjects that immediately come to mind. There's something in around the country called democracy dollars, where voters are given an opportunity to reform campaign finance. So I don't want to pick anything that just because I think it's a good idea. I'm sure there's a lot of people in Illinois who have other ideas, but they would at least have the chance to petition to put it on the ballot. I want to stress, getting signatures, 8% of those who voted in the last gubernatorial election, that's a lot of signatures. Right now, it's about 323,000 signatures. And I can tell you it's hard. Getting 635,158 signatures was mighty hard. And it doesn't happen by magic unless you have something that really moves the people. And to me, the very process of gathering signatures encourages debate and discussion by everyday people about their government.
Representative, more than half of the House seats up for grabs. There's no real contest there. It's same thing for the Senate seats that are available. I know you have another constitutional amendment about some kind of committee to oversee redistricting. Can you kind of react to the lack of competition there is at the State House, and what a constitutional amendment like that could bring about?
Sure.
And if the governor wants to react to having a committee oversee that type of thing as well, that'd be great.
Well, the lack of competition within the legislature is a major problem. And when we incentivize where most of the competition is actually taking place in primaries, in the right and left, I think it's problematic. And I think it yields outcomes for our government where we come together in a building like this and we don't do things that are meeting the expectations of serving as legislators and representing the people of the state. I'll remind you, just in the last year, we have what I call an artificial supermajority of Democrats in the legislature. We had more votes cast for Republican candidates running for the House throughout the state of Illinois than Democrats. Yet Democrats have a 2/3 to 1/3 supermajority that I think is artificial. Now, I have a different constitutional amendment that gets us back to the question of fair maps. And as the governor has pointed out, one of the most recent petition initiatives was nearly 600,000 signatures that were collected for an independent map-making process in 2016, and it was overturned by the Supreme Court. Another example of the Supreme Court making this decision when there's tremendous voter enthusiasm for a particular topic. So we need, with this ethics initiative, with this amendment, to send a message that we're going to make it easier for voters to move forward and call the question on important reforms for their government. And if we don't do that, we're sending a message with recent court actions and historic court actions that folks shouldn't be engaged in that important work. We have to reverse that trend because we need to have voters stepping up and demanding accountability in their government and making a better environment for ethical conduct of leaders for the state of Illinois.
Very well said. Matter of fact, in Michigan, they actually had an initiative dealing with redistricting, started by Katie Fahey, who I got to meet. She was a mom decided the system wasn't so good, it was kind of stacked, and she went out and organized an initiative using Facebook and all kinds of things. And so now, we didn't have that in 1976. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't even have personal computers. We used index cards for all those petition passers. So we can use modern technology to have the kind of government that the people deserve.
You both mentioned reform initiatives that were shot down by the Illinois Supreme Court. Any thought given to getting rid of a partisan elected Supreme Court?
Well, you can do that by, right now, you need a constitutional amendment to do that, yeah. It'd be interesting, some states, have a system where it's an appointed Supreme Court. Yeah, but we don't. I think electing Supreme Court judges is still a good idea, although reforming the financing of those campaigns would be, I think, very important. I think that's an area where we should really look at it, and that could be something that an ethics initiative does. Okay, I know we have some other friends who want to talk, so you guys, we'll see you next time, okay? All right, get everything? Well done there, Ryan. Thank you. Well,